People love horror movies. To feel scared for your life and disturbed for days after your initial viewing of a film, who wouldn't want that? In an industry where it feels as though this filmmaking style has gotten really repetitive, people are starting to gravitate towards filmmakers who are attacking this genre in a more creative and complex way. One of the biggest filmmakers in that category is Ari Aster. Aster first got his big buzz around a year ago with his wide release of Hereditary. People loved this thing, and I'll get into why as this video progresses. People were curious to know what else this guy could do, and literally 12 months later we get his highly anticipated follow-up, Midsommar. If you thought Hereditary was crazy, this thing is absurd. These two films are completely different, but they're very similar in tone and what they're trying to get out of the viewer. There was automatically going to be some comparison, and while I don't like to compare two separate pieces of art, I mean, come on. I'll be breaking these two down by scare, visuals, story, sustainability, and entertainment. And as a disclaimer, I love both of these movies a lot. In fact, I can't figure out which one I like more, which is why I'm now here in front of a microphone about to compare the two to figure out which is the better film. Also, I'm probably going to spoil both of these films, so proceed with caution or don't watch it all if you don't want that. So without any further ado, here's an opinion you did not ask for. If there's one thing Ari Aster is good at, it's not necessarily scaring the viewer, but disturbing the viewer. When Hereditary was first getting buzz, all I was hearing about was that it would fuck me up for days, and at that time, 20-year-old Karsten was like, sick! And I was certainly not disappointed. Hereditary was and still is not an easy watch. To see this woman and everyone around her slowly crumble is sad and disturbing to see, especially the way Aster does it. Now there's something I've talked about quite a bit on this channel and on my podcast, which is my nut allergy. You can probably tell where this is going. Not only do I think Hereditary has the scarier scene out of these two films, it has one of the scariest and most anxiety-inducing scenes I've ever experienced. To see this girl go into anaphylactic shock in a setting where she is nowhere near a hospital with people who aren't gonna help, Jesus Christ. Hereditary overall feels a lot closer to home with the way it tackles its scares. They're things that could technically happen to any of us. With loads of great tension, terrifyingly memorable visual imagery, and a sense of relatability, Hereditary makes for a pretty chilling experience. Midsommar is way different than that. I don't think a lot of us can say we're going to Swedish festivals in the middle of the summer after losing our entire family. But I'm not going to act like there isn't a sense of relatability to Midsommar's scariness. Our characters react to the setting in a pretty normal and human way. We're supposed to feel the fear they feel, and Aster definitely gets that across in my opinion. The thing about Midsommar is I wouldn't say it's necessarily as scary as it is disturbing. You definitely get less and more.
What the fuck?
Whereas Hereditary feels like a very tight space where the walls are closing in on you, Midsommar feels the way it looks. You're in an open space under the sun, but you're lost, away from normality, and have no control over your actions. This lack in control lingers throughout the film, as most of these actions aren't at our protagonist Danny's fault. While I think Midsommar has a really unique way of approaching fear that it actually pulls off quite well, Hereditary does do the same thing while simultaneously coming across pretty scary. To be honest, this one is pretty easy, but I'll go over it anyways. Hereditary does look good and certainly has its memorable visuals. It achieves what any great horror film should aim to achieve, which is capturing memorable and disturbing images that won't ever leave the viewer's head. Think about this shot, or probably a bunch of others that might not be okay for YouTube. Hereditary does what it needs to do, but Midsommar just knocks this one out of the park. The fact that it takes place in the daylight allows for a much more vibrant and, dare I say, pretty image. When looking at the camera movement, the framing, the angles, it's much more interesting to look at than Hereditary in my opinion. For every iconic shot Hereditary has, Midsommar has like 10 of those. The cinematography also has a lot more personality in Midsommar compared to Hereditary. You could look at any shot in Midsommar and say, that's Midsommar. There's a very specific feeling I get from looking at that. Whereas with Hereditary, there are certain shots that feel like they belong in any run-of-the-mill horror movie. Don't get me wrong, Hereditary has good visuals, but stuff like this really gives Midsommar its own special place in film history. Here's the thing, and I'm not afraid to say it, I still don't 100% understand Hereditary, and I'm not even close to 100% understanding Midsommar. But that's okay. One of the things I loved about Aster's approach is he is able to tell a story with layers really well. You don't need to understand the symbols and themes in the film to understand the surface level story. You can approach his films however you want to approach them. Hereditary tells the story of a family and the secrets and events that happen after their grandmother dies. It's pretty simple on its surface, which allows for most of the events that happen throughout the film to be up for interpretation, and to some viewers, a bit confusing. I personally love it. I love how this film works as a slow descent into madness, and each scare and event feels like a new puzzle piece to the entire thing. Each character or member of the family is approaching this entire thing differently, and it's fascinating to see how they come together and break apart throughout the film as they react to these events. With all that being said, while it succeeds in creating compelling characters and scenes and an overall build-up, it suffers in creating a concrete plot. Some will argue it doesn't need that, and I agree. I think this film pulls it off, but it wouldn't hurt to have a bit more structure to it. Midsommar Midsommar is a mixed bag in this category. While it has a clear plot and structure that I absolutely love, it abandons a lot of its plot points. It's building up a lot of the characters we see in the film, like Josh and Pell, but we never really get to know them. It uses the characters for whichever one is convenient to conveying an emotion at that time in the story, rather than using the characters to build someone to relate to. It's like I wish it was more abstract like Hereditary, or even more concrete, but it feels kind of awkwardly in the middle. The film also feels pretty tight and scary until the last 30 minutes or so, when all of a sudden the characters feel much more in control and the stakes feel a lot lower. I don't want it to seem like I hate the story though. This film has a really fun story that it pulls off way better than it should. It's also super original. Wait. I think a big thing both of these films have is sustainability, something a lot of films forget to think about. How is this film going to age? Will it continue to be appreciated for years to come? What did it represent in the era it was released in? These are important factors that both Hereditary and Midsommar take into consideration. Hereditary feels like a classic in the making, plain and simple. I know I've been throwing that term around a lot lately, but it's because there's a lot of films that are out that kind of deserve it. Hereditary, like I said earlier, has so many iconic and memorable scenes and images that will be referenced for decades. I already know Paxson is going to make a shitty t-shirt with Toni Collette's face on it someday. In this era of filmmakers making better horror, it definitely stands up there as one of the most important. And the thing is, I can honestly say the same about Midsommar. The thing about Midsommar is that it doesn't have as many singular iconic scenes the way Hereditary does. The entire thing blends together as one giant weird experience. I also think a huge thing Midsommar has going for it is the inspiration it draws from older films. It blends certain 70s stylistic elements with modern day horror tricks to create something that feels very original. Kind of like the new Suspiria, but less boring. It's definitely a movie that can be watched either alone to study or pick apart, or with a group to just have a lot of fun with it, and I can personally see it aging really well. Lastly, entertainment. This aspect has been touched on just a little in each category we've gone over, but it's worth looking at what movie is just straight up more fun to watch. This is a really tough one because I had such a good time with both of these movies, although calling it a good time would be a stretch. Hereditary feels like such a unique experience, as just when you thought it was at its peak, it gets even crazier. Toni Collette and Alex Wolff both deliver performances that you just can't look away from and force you to feel how they feel. It feels like good old-fashioned horror, but done in a completely new and modern way. Midsommar is pretty much the same, but replaced Toni Collette with Florence Pugh. This thing is a blast and feels bizarre from start to finish. But if there's one thing Midsommar has, it's Will Poulter as Mark. Silly statement, I know, but having this sense of comic relief that is actually really funny is huge. Hereditary is obviously pretty self-aware, it knows when to take itself seriously and when not to, but Midsommar has so many moments where I'm like, that is exactly how I would react, without feeling forced or out of place. To have this break in tension and change in tones creates for a much more interesting experience in my opinion. So with that being said, it's seriously neck and neck, but at the end of the day, I'm gonna have to go with Midsommar as the superior film. Hereditary is great and will continue to be appreciated and discussed for years to come, but Midsommar feels like such an ambitious and breath of fresh air to the horror genre. Despite the amount of influence that clearly went into it, it still feels like its own thing entirely that took a handful of risks, which is worth appreciating. I say this a lot, but I seriously don't think that you can just brush Midsommar off your shoulder after seeing it. To see a film that taps into your emotions on such a specific level and have such a fun time doing it, I can't help but love this thing. Love it or hate it, you can't deny Midsommar is unlike anything you've ever seen before. Hope you guys enjoyed this, hope you didn't get too offended. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.